Ryan, that you sketched out. It's not complete yet. I think there might be a little bit, you need to move it around a little bit more, but basically moving these blocks is a very simple exercise. In the background, we're seeing ArcGIS or Esri's server with their imagery coming through. So this is a mashup of BIM and GIS and information about these healthcare facilities. And then we landed them in Google Earth. So we have the first location in Google Earth, which I think the comment was that it's too far from the central location. As we have the first building here. In this case, it's just the blocks, but it's the same data that we saw earlier with more detail. And Google Earth and other GIS tools are great for doing rapid what ifs in a specific location. And we moved it over to this new location here. And maybe Tiffany or Ryan, maybe you can give us some pointers here. I think it might be a little bit tight here, but maybe we reduce some of the building sizes. But this was just literally a few minute exercise that we did just from the quick input that you gave us.
Yeah, that looks like a great layout. You know, there need to be some input about accessibility. This is the front of the hospital, but you know, in times like this, I'm sure they could reroute some things for temporary usage and layout. So I'm not sure to comment there.
Well, and I'm being a clinician and not an architect myself, though. I'm amazed at the way that you all think, because you really touch on things that are very very important to what we're dealing. The interesting time frame that we're in right now is that people are considering these things where we wouldn't have this discussion 6 months ago. And so we do share services somewhat with St. Joseph, which is a different healthcare system there across the street. The collaborative efforts would be very important, and accessibility is absolutely important. I think we have actually several options. Ryan, where you say that it's too far away from the hospital, infection prevention may like it isolated from the hospital. So you never know what the driver is going to be. You know, currently many of the hospital systems, I triangulate between 3 right now, store their, you know, emergency supplies in shipping containers. And as we all know, even at the government level, we saw expiration and damage in that format. So being able to deploy things in a real time with, you know, fresh supplies and use them on demand. I think even having a couple of options, depending on what the drivers are. You know, right now, this was largely an adult. We see an emergence of pediatrics. It might need to be closer to the children's hospital. So that fluidity and being able to do these quick models and what if scenarios is really, really important.
Great input. Yeah, and this literally was just a few minute exercise. So imagine if we had a little bit more time, we could actually solve quite a bit more. The main driver here is that we're not reinventing the wheel. We're using these resources. These containers started from a design in Italy just a few weeks ago that they open source, so we can say what they look like, what content is inside it, what assets are inside it, how much space do you have to store PPEs, for example, is the scenario tying back to Grant Thornton. So this it's pretty exciting to see everybody come together like this. So let's move on. Okay, so we went from, oops, I'm getting some noise. Go ahead, okay. All right, so we've landed at a new location here at Children's Hospital in Orange County. We have another potential site with a story unit. We're getting some background noise here from, if you can mute your mic if you're not speaking. Thank you. And back to the theme of being able to count information in these buildings, we have a bed count now. So if we know what the ICU requirements are, now as we're landing these buildings, we're getting initial costs, initial bed count, initial supplies and assets, and a count of every single piece of equipment coming from building information models. So we're toward the end. Should we start the discussion, Mike? And I started jotting down some key points with you while we were transitioning here, but the first key point is be ready to adjust to technical difficulties. This is all real time, and this happens a lot, and we know as with these online meetings, but it's natural. So I thank you for putting up with that. And Mike, why don't you jump in and start the discussion?
I think, you know, we do appreciate the audience and their time. So we're scheduled to end in 2 minutes, but I suggest that we go into overtime. If people have to leave, we understand that, but let's keep the discussion going and have it recorded for people who weren't able to attend.
Yeah, we'll share the recording. And Art gave us some good input on people. And
Yeah, so Art, Kimon, if you could go back to the costs, because so much of this activity is driven by costs. Art, how does this visualization of multiple options help decision makers feel comfortable about cost outlays?
Well, you can look at it a couple of ways. Sometimes, too many options is not good too. I mean, if you think of it like when you go to a restaurant and you look at the menu and there's all kinds of choices, it makes it a little bit more difficult to choose. So sometimes less is more. But with that being said, as long as it's easy to interpret, like I'm seeing here, the graphs are great because it helps you visualize.
yeah, it's great input. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And then to the Grant Thornton team, how are costs included in your projections, or is that a separate scenario that is explored?
They can certainly be incorporated, especially into things like the network distribution. You can add in costs for shipping, for handling, for the all of the components around procurement. Moshe, I'm sure you have some more notes on costs around that, right? But it can certainly be added as constraints into optimizations and prioritization if those are components that drive decision making.
Excellent. So for our fictional field hospital company, Tiffany, can you tell us some of the constraints or requirements that might be something we would consider for moving PPE from one location to another?
In large quantities, that's what you're talking about, like big. I mean, storage is always an issue. Most hospitals are pretty well equipped to handle supply, and you're talking about using it in real time. So I think to the people of Grant Thornton, if they have tracking of comings and goings and demands, the allocation of it and distribution is less of an issue compared to the procurement and actually being able to have it on hand with forecasting of when arrivals will be. So, if you're talking about a fluid real-time back and forth with data sets, knowing what the demand is, what the supply availability is, maybe regionalizing it. I know even within this current COVID situation, many hospitals, get on a phone with local systems to try to share. So the distribution is less of an issue. I think that the touch points that the folks at Grant Thornton are really touching on is that supply and really finding the demand that's greatest is spot on.
Excellent, thank you. So,
and let me just add one more thing too, Mike. When you're in the system and you guys are talking about PPE and ventilators, I imagine there's going to be kind of tertiary things that may come with this as well, even though it's not an as-built problem. When you look at PPE as something that is usually single use and gets thrown away, this is vital, and so it does trickle up to your building spaces that you're talking about. And then we're going into kind of the reads with the details of PPE and stuff like that. But pharmacy, laboratory, testing, all of these things, this is all so vital to us. And so I'll just say to this panel, on behalf of the people that are inside the building, thank you so much for even having this conversation and for allowing me to be part of it. It touches my heartstrings to see your list of all those children's hospitals, because I know those people intimately, and I can't wait to share this recording with them.
Excellent. So speaking of spaces and the PPE, Ryan works for Solitude, which is a company that makes skylights, and Ryan got the company to start producing face shields. Ryan, can you talk about the size of the boxes of this and quantities of the face shields, just so we can kind of start understanding the space requirements for PPE?
Well, and it's an interesting concept too. We as a company to ship out something that's fully assembled so the user can use it right away when they get it. But then that volume quadruples, if not even more, between flat packing and a face shield that's fully configured, ready to put on. And so you kind of have the, now you need some insight from the teams and the shields that we have delivered so far, because Solitude's made about 6,000 so far, along with HMC Architects doing their own as well, that they are pretty smart. They know how to put things together, and that they would rather have them easily accessible and not take up so much room. But the boxes, our current box is about 16 inches by 16 inches by 2.5 feet tall, and you only get 15 in that box. And it takes up a ton of room if you stack them that way. So as people who are delivering new face shield equipment for the first time, we're going through our own learning curve as well, as a company that's never done that before. So it's interesting to see its impact on space.
Tiffany,
Great.
how many fields do people go through?
Oh, your audio's bad, Mike.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Did you say how many face shields do we go through?
Yeah, I think that's the question.
Okay. Well, you know, the neat thing about this particular project is that Ryan came to me and actually got to spend a little bit of time with our central supply and actually do a little bit of, get a little bit of feedback on what their needs were. And so they actually tweaked, you know, we started with an open source BIM model that there were several out there, one from Columbia, one from Georgia Tech, you know, and landing on the design, we had the opportunity to actually look at several different iterations before they landed on one. And Ryan had the specs of the actual plastic, which was pretty high grade compared to the large donations that the hospital was receiving from Rotary clubs and people just trying to fab up whatever they could. So this was a very high quality product. And we were very quickly able to figure out how to clean them, how to reuse them. So having the thought of that burn rate in mind. So there was a little bit of innovation going on as well, but also knowing that should they be disposed of and needed to be, it wasn't a huge loss. So they really struck a sweet in between for trying to minimize the burn rate and while giving them something that's pretty easy to get their hands on.
Great, thank you for all that great input. Roger, I don't know if you're still on, but if you'd like to say a few words about the need for open standards for communicating, because all this wiring that we did to connect all these different pieces of data, all the way from facilities to information on the web to patient information, was made possible in many parts by having standards that drive the ability to connect.
Hi,
If you're
thanks,
not,
Tom. Yeah, I am still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Kimon. Yes, I appreciate you raising that point. We're always trying to look for ways to make it so that the owners who get the benefits from the use of technology and the work of their consultants can use requirements that are openly available and standardized, so they don't have to spend as much time, energy, and effort developing their own standards. They can reference those that are available by the industry and have been developed through some kind of consensus process. There are a lot of different options out there, and you have to do research to find you know, which ones work for you. At the National Institute of Building Sciences, we work on the national BIM standards. So the idea of that is to try to collect a lot of the BIM related standards together, and that is helpful. The other thing that's important here is that information be structured, and you know, if the structure can be published and known, that is maybe the first step. It doesn't necessarily have to be based on a standard, but the structure has to be discoverable and it has to be usable by others. So I think there's a combination of things that work together, and working with the different people involved, the owner who has requirements and internal systems that they need to plug into, the software companies that make applications, and the practitioners who create the content. That's really important to bring all those groups together. So that's why, to me, this is very exciting to see kind of a little slice of how you can collaboratively do that in real time and talk about those kinds of challenges and how to address them.
Perfect. Yeah. And actually, one interesting point about this is that the open standards are about sharing information, but you can still be competitive. So, for example, obviously, healthcare systems do compete with each other, but there also is a wealth of information that's valuable that needs to be shared, especially in a situation like this. And that applies to the building industry and all across the board. And I think it's never more important than right now. And Moshe, I know that you've been involved a lot with the Asset Leadership Network and ISO 55000. And how can that be used to guide policy and strategy to inform decision making in this complex time? How do you think that applies right now? How can we best utilize ISO 55000?
No, absolutely. You know, the requirements under 55,000 for data standardization, for the interlinking of strategy and metrics, so that we can better respond to significant scenario changes in the asset management system. You know, all comes out of 55,000. It would significantly increase our capability to respond to significant events like the COVID-19 crisis. So I think it provides a nice framework that, if followed, would make us a lot more resilient as a country, whether it's in the healthcare industry or in the federal or state and local government. 100% applicability.
Perfect. Yes. I think that's a good place to actually wrap up this whole session. We covered a lot. We went over a little bit. We got a bumpy start, but I think we took off after that. We're resilient and we made up for some time, but thanks everybody for sticking around for an extra 10 minutes. And we will we'll have ongoing webinars and workshops in the following weeks. If you have any ideas or input, please let us know. And we're very excited. In this difficult time, it's very exciting to see everybody come together like this. And so thank you very much for joining us at BIMStorm at a distance, and find out more at bimstorm.com, and we'll be posting the videos and the material for everybody to access. Thank you to all the panelists, and we'll sign off.
Thank you, Kimon.
Thanks, Kimon.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks
Thank you,
everybody. Thanks, Kimon. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Thank you.